Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when a being who was already born as the peak of destruction still manages to evolve? Because when we talk about Sukuna, most people already start from the assumption that he was always unbeatable, the king of curses, the monster that existed before any exorcism system ever did, the creature that the ancestors of the sorcerer world tried to erase from history and failed. But here's the detail that changes everything. The Sukuna we met at the beginning of Jujutsu Kaisen was not the complete Sukuna. He was a fragment, a fraction of something far greater. And when the story finally revealed what happens when he reassembles himself, when he takes over the body that actually contains the totality of his existence, the entire world of the series shifted to another level. So today we're going to dive deep into this, not just the technical details of his power, but what Sukuna's final transformation represents within the narrative, within the philosophy of the work, and why it's one of the most well-crafted antagonist evolutions in modern manga. But before anything else, you need to understand where he came from. Over 1,000 years ago, during Japan's Heian period, a child was born that the world already recognized as an aberration, different from other humans, different from sorcerers themselves. 4 arms, 2 faces, cursed energy overflowing from birth at a level that had no precedent and no explanation. The historical records within the JJK universe are deliberately vague about Sukuna's childhood. JJ Akutami never wanted to fully humanize him, never wanted to create that classic villain arc with a childhood trauma that justifies everything. Sukuna is not a victim of the system. He is the system turning itself inside out. He was born human. That's fundamental. He's not a cursed spirit that emerged from humanity's collective fear like Gojo Satoru. He's not a creature from another plane. He was a human being who possessed cursed energy at such an absurd level that even after death, that energy refused to dissolve. And that's where the horror begins. The sorcerers of that era tried to destroy the body. They couldn't. They tried to purify the energy. It didn't work. The only solution found was to scatter his existence across 20 fingers, seal each one separately, and hope that none of them would be swallowed by someone with a vessel strong enough to survive it. For 1,000 years, that worked, until Itadori Yuji showed up. And now, with Yuji as his vessel, Sukuna's journey toward his complete form truly begins. Not all at once, not instantly. Every finger consumed is a step. Every recovered fragment is one more layer of consciousness, of power, of will, reassembling itself. What we witness throughout the entire series is literally a god of destruction remembering who he is. Now, to understand the final transformation, you need to understand what makes Sukuna different from any other character in the series in terms of combat. He's not strong because he has some absurd special attack. He's not the final villain because he has a complex world domination plan. Sukuna is terrifying because he represents the idea that there is a ceiling to power, and he is that ceiling. His innate technique, dismantle and cleave, malevolent shrine, would already be enough to place him above virtually every sorcerer in history. It's a domain expansion that doesn't create a closed space like most do. It opens into the real world. It cuts everything within a radius without discrimination. Walls, sorcerers, the ground itself. It's a technique that exists as a philosophical statement. There is no defense against the absolute. But what happens when Sukuna takes over Megumi Fushiguro's body? This is the most calculated turning point in the entire narrative. JJ spends entire arcs building Megumi as a character of unlimited potential, the boy of the 10 shadows, the technique that in theory could surpass even Gojo. A technique that carries within it the legend of a sorcerer who managed to subjugate mahoraga itself, the shikigami that no 10 shadows user in history had ever fully tamed. Sukuna knew that. He planned for it. The choice of Megumi's body wasn't opportunism. It was surgical. It was the king of curses identifying the only vessel beyond Yuji that could contain the full extent of what he is. And more than that, a technique he could use as a tool to reach something even he couldn't access before. When Sukuna finally triggers the complete collapse of Megumi, when he crushes the boy's will using his sister's death as a lever, we witness something that goes beyond a battle. It's an erasure. Sukuna doesn't just take the body, he extinguishes the flame of the sorcerer who was inside it. And with that, he has the 10 shadows completely at his disposal. But here's what most people underestimate. Sukuna with the 10 shadows isn't simply a stronger Sukuna. It's Sukuna with access to an adaptability his technique never had. Dismantle and cleave is raw power, pure devastation. But the 10 shadows is versatility, strategy, responsiveness. It's like a boxer with the heaviest knockout punch in the world, also learning how to wrestle. The combination creates something without precedent in the series lore. And then comes mahoraga, the shikigami that adapts, that with every blow received recalibrates its own body and its own existence to neutralize what nearly destroyed it. The wheel above its head isn't decoration, it's a real-time evolution mechanism. Sukuna subjugates mahoraga, and not only that, he understands the adaptation mechanism and begins using it as an offensive weapon. When he transfers Maharaga's adaptation property to his malevolent shrine cuts, the result is a strike that adapts to any defense, one that shatters Gojo Satoru's infinity, that pierces what should have been impenetrable. That's the technical transformation, but there's a deeper layer. Put yourself in this situation for a second. You spent 1,000 years fragmented, 1,000 years existing as pieces scattered across the world, without continuous consciousness, without form, without the ability to fully express who you are. And now, for the first time since you died in the Heian period, you are whole again. How would you act? Sukuna doesn't act with rage. He doesn't act with a desire for revenge against the world that tried to erase him. He acts with something far colder and far more frightening: curiosity. There's a scene that defines his character better than any battle. When he finally faces Gojo Satoru, the man considered the strongest sorcerer of the modern era, the only being who could potentially contain Sukuna, and he smiles. It's not the smile of someone about to destroy an enemy. It's the smile of someone who has finally found an interesting puzzle. Sukuna, at his core, is an aesthete of violence, a connoisseur of strength. He doesn't want to exterminate humanity because he hates humans. He wants to test the limits of what exists, because living at the peak and finding nothing that equals you is, in his view, the ultimate boredom. And that makes him a far more disturbing villain than any antagonist driven by trauma or ideology, because you can negotiate with someone who wants power. You can try to understand someone who wants revenge. But a being that evaluates your existence as if it were a piece of art he may or may not choose to preserve, depending on how much you entertain him, there's no negotiation possible. The battle against Gojo Satoru is the climax of that philosophy in action. Two absolutes meeting, the infinity against the adapted malevolent shrine, the most refined technique of the modern era against the most brutal power in history. And when Sukuna wins, and the result of that battle shook the entire fandom when it was revealed, what's most shocking isn't the how, it's the aftermath. Sukuna looks at Gojo Satoru's body with something close to respect, acknowledges the greatness of what he just defeated, and moves on. No excessive celebration, no villain speech, just the next step. Because to him, Gojo was a worthy obstacle, and obstacles exist to be overcome. But what does he actually want? Here, Gege Akutami's narrative does something brilliant. Throughout the entire series, Sukuna's motivation stays deliberately nebulous. There's no villain manifesto. There's no explicit goal like destroying the world or building a new order. What's gradually revealed is a particular cosmology, a belief, if a being like him believes in anything, that strength is the only real value, that the genuine world is one where only the strongest exists. It's not an ideal of purity, it's an aesthetic of survival elevated to the status of a personal religion. And his final transformation is the physical incarnation of that philosophy. It's not an evolution that came from training, from sacrifice, from pushing past limits through sweat and determination the way it does for Yuji, for Megumi, for Nobata. It's the inevitable. It was always meant to be this way. The universe simply had to wait until all the pieces were in place. Now let's talk about what really matters for those following the manga, what this transformation means for Yuji Itadori. Because at its core, Jujutsu Kaisen is Yuji's story, and Sukuna isn't just the villain, he's the mirror. Yuji started his journey as a boy who wanted to give people a proper death. A simple motivation, almost naive, inside a world that consumes and discards lives without ceremony. His grandfather's dying wish as a moral compass. And Sukuna spent his entire existence treating death like clay, something he molds, decides, and distributes however he sees fit. The narrative irony is cruel and perfect. The only vessel strong enough to contain Sukuna is exactly the kind of human being that represents everything Sukuna despises. Someone who cares, someone who feels, someone for whom every life lost carries weight. Yuji carries the guilt of the deaths caused by Sukuna inside him. Every time the King of Curses acted using his body, Yuji felt it as his own responsibility. And Sukuna knows that, and couldn't care less. But here's what Sukuna's final transformation triggers in Yuji's narrative. It forces the protagonist to confront a question that has no comfortable answer. How do you defeat something that is literally the peak of human existence transformed into a curse? It's not a battle of strength. It's not a question of technique. It's a question of what it means to resist an absolute when you are fundamentally human. And Gege Akutami builds this with a sophistication that becomes clearer the further the series progresses. Yuji isn't going to defeat Sukuna by being stronger. That was never the premise. The premise was always what happens when humanity, with all its fragility, contradictions, and losses, refuses to accept that the strongest is what defines the value of existing. Sukuna's final transformation is the villain's ultimate argument. Yuji, and everything he represents, is the answer. And in that duel of philosophies, embodied in bodies that fight with cursed techniques and supernatural energy, Jujutsu Kaisen finds what it always was. Not a battle shonen, a study of what makes human existence valid even in the face of the inevitable. Sukuna, in his complete form, with the 10 shadows, with Mahoraga tamed, with the adapted malevolent shrine, is the hardest question the series asks. The answer is still being written, and you, after all of this, do you still think Sukuna's maximum power is about strength? Or could it be that his true terror lies in proving that existing without caring about anything might be the most absolute form of freedom there is?